whatever it looks like to get there, I don't really care as long as we figure out together how to do it.
This week's episode I'm calling When is a Strategist Not a Strategist? And that's my clever way of setting up when she's a creative. And today we have with us a wonderful strategist who also has a ton of wonderful creative instincts. And this is Ayzenberg's Director of Strategy, Ashley Owen. So Ashley, welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
I think, the question that we're going to kind of be dancing around is where does the job of a strategist end and a creative director begin? Or maybe do we even see it that way? So I think, usually first I like to just ask you, what does it mean to be a strategy director?
Yeah, good question. I feel like it changes every day. But if I kind of zoom out, I look at my job in three core functions. So there's existing client business where I'm providing strategic leadership to the clients with whom we already have relationships. There's a second bucket that's new business, right? So I work quite a bit with my creative counterparts at the agency to help bring in new business relationships and new business opportunities. And then the third bucket is just management and leadership. So I guess the director part of the role is leading and managing a team. So I sort of, some days are more one of those buckets than others, and some days I hit all three of them equally. So it really just depends on what's going on at the moment.
For the part which is the ongoing relationship with a brand or a product that you're providing strategic insight and direction for, have you found that you have ways of acknowledging for yourself and your team, yes, the market is and the product are performing the way we thought, like our strategy is paying off? Do you have regular demarcation points at which you're kind of checking in, I guess, in the kind of way that we talk about at Ayzenberg, listen, create, share, being a virtuous cycle. You're checking in and going, okay, we're on target.
Yeah. So again, we're talking about, I guess, modern strategy, right? And today, I mean, almost everything is measurable and trackable for the most part. So typically in a lot of the digital or social campaigns that we're doing now, we can track everything along the way. So we'll look at, kind of the specifics, individual campaigns, individual pieces of creative and see how they're performing. And we can zoom out and take that bigger view of like, are we achieving the thing that we're all here working towards anyway? I think there are sometimes it's harder to measure, like when you have to do more like qualitative or quantitative research, like are we really changing the people's perceptions like we wanted to as well? So that's maybe a little bit more of like a kind of a classic approach, but it's another way to sort of measure whether or not the work that we're doing is having the desired effect.
And now that I'm drilling down on this, do you get straight up, like, would you get bummed automatically if you were like, oh, it's not doing what I thought? Or is that just interesting and like raises the bar?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's interesting and raises the bar. And I think it's exciting sometimes to go, you know what, we've got to look at this differently. We've got to do it. Like if we don't throw it out right away, but if you find out along the way that something maybe isn't working the way you thought, like you're still learning something. And oftentimes it's the foundation for the next path we're taking. And I get a little bit of a thrill by going, let's pretend we're starting from scratch. What would we do now? Like with the information we have now. So it's not always, sometimes it's a bummer when things don't perform like you wanted them to or hope that they would. But other times it's like, all right, well, let's go. It's like, it's just upping the ante a little bit, a new challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. You reminded me of something that happens in my world on the creative side. Well, actually, maybe we're not going to be calling it my world. It's our world.
Right.
But one of the things that I've identified on the creative team that I wonder if it happens on the strategy team as well, and our shared team, as it were, is that feeling you just alluded to of I've wasted my time. Oh, the client shifted gears and I've wasted my time. Or, oh, my idea didn't get picked and I've wasted my time. And I know I am always coaching the people that I work with. Don't think of it as a waste of time because we really can't, we just simply cannot waste time because every path we go down eliminates other paths and lights up new ones, you know? So it's good to hear that it's, kind of the same all over.
Oh yeah. And if you call it a waste of time, you're just setting yourself up for kind of disappointment, right? You almost, I
Hmm.
feel like in order to keep going in this industry, you've got to kind of take advantage of those opportunities and look at them that way. Otherwise, you're good because you're going to get let down all the time. That's kind of part of the job, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So what I went down a little bit of a wormhole there, but what was the pathway that you took to get to do what you do today?
Yeah, so I actually studied advertising in undergrad. Like I'm one of the few examples I think of like the people who go to college for the thing that they end up doing. But when I graduated, I did a couple of internships when I was in college. I wanted to be a copywriter. Actually, that was my dream, and my intent was to be a creative. And
I've
when
seen
I
some of your copy, by the way, and you are a very talented copywriter. So,
Thank you. Thank you. I'll add that to my resume. Yeah, so I wanted to be this copywriter. I did a couple of internships and I was like, I don't like this advertising thing because as much as I want to be a writer, I also have this other side of my brain that's really analytical and business oriented. And like, I didn't like the act of receiving a brief and then having to just write off that brief and turn around. Like I wanted to be involved in the problem solving and the client relations more than I felt like I was going to be as a copywriter when I was 22. So at that point, I actually got a master's in strategic public relations. I felt like getting a master's was a good idea. I still didn't know what I wanted to do. The economy was in a terrible place at that time, as it is now, and I couldn't find a job. So I got a master's and I went into nonprofit work. And I got to do everything there. So it was the complete opposite, right? Like I wasn't put into any boxes or any sort of cubby holes because in a nonprofit, you have to do everything. So that was really cool. I led a fundraising group there. And anyway, while I was working at this nonprofit, I had an opportunity to help out with a pitch. My friend worked at an advertising agency and they were pitching for business with my alma mater, the University of Miami. And they
you
reached
got
out
it
to
in.
yeah, they reached out to me and they asked me to help with this pitch because it was the strategist who was interviewing me as someone who had gone to the school. And again, my competitive nature sort of came out in the interview. I was like, oh, I can help with this. And so I helped a little bit more than I intended. They won the pitch and they offered me a job. So I found myself exactly where I said I would never be at an advertising agency, but it was kind of a cool experience to get to work on a brand that I already knew really well and loved. And yeah, so that was sort of my weird, windy path back to advertising. And I've been there ever since.
That sounds really cool. I was just in the middle of that. I was teasing you because you managed to squeeze in your alma mater. I'm always thinking like,
Oh,
I should do
yeah.
that more. I should be like, so anyway, when I was at Penn State, maybe they'll underwrite us, both Miami and Penn State. Well, listen, I'm going to do something right now with you that you're probably going to find totally annoying then, which is I've been working lately on the show to kind of start up episodes with a bit of a glossary. Do you remember the glossary? Like, I don't know
Uh,
what, like when you were a kid, how the books had, here's what everything means, which is like kind of the epitome of cubbyhole. So
right.
what I was
Yeah.
thinking I would do is just throw some terms at you and ask you, what does this mean to you? What is a strategist?
Okay, yeah. A strategist, the simplest definition of a strategist is the person in the advertising world, responsible for bringing the audiences or consumers' point of view to the process. They're responsible for having the audience's voice.
That's brilliant. I've never heard it defined that way, probably because I didn't study strategy, but that's really cool. So that it comes down to that is basically bringing the audience's point of view into the process.
Yeah. So whether
Yeah.
and that's my definition, and it's where I always go back to when inevitably things are confusing or unclear, it's like, wait a minute, am I doing the basic function of this role right now? As long as I'm doing that, it doesn't really matter how I'm
Wow.
going about it.
That
Yeah.
is, so powerful for me. Like, yeah, we've been working together for a long time, and I've
Yeah.
certainly worked with other strategists. I've never heard it said that way. And it makes me think one of the things that's been coming up episode after episode on this show is the importance of the why in any question, in any inquiry that you're doing, in any insight that you're pursuing. And I can see that that would be such a powerful why for you. To be you're the voice of the audience, or you're the representative of the audience.
Totally, totally. Yeah, I actually early in my career when I got that job at the advertising agency, I came in actually as a like a community manager. Basically, I came in on like a social and digital team at a much more traditional agency, and I immediately was like the chief strategy officer was this brilliant, powerful, amazing woman, and just such a badass. And she explained it once, and not even directly to me. She was talking to somebody else, and I remember writing it down in those early days. She said, where the account lead is the representative of the client, and the
Mm-hmm.
creative lead is the voice of the work. They're there to defend and stand for the best work. The strategist is there to uphold the voice of the audience in the room. And it was like light bulb. I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do.
All right. So, what is an analyst?
Okay, yeah. So analysts are the ones who are, so as a strategist, if you're going to maintain the point of view of the audience, you've got to understand them, their mindsets, their behaviors. So the analyst is like the partner to the strategist in the way that maybe like a copywriter and an art director often partners. The analyst is actually pulling in data. Now we've got tons of data, right? More than we ever have known what to do with. So they're pulling in that data and organizing it in a way, analyzing it, so that we can derive learnings about our audience, what resonates with them, what doesn't, what performs well, so that can inform future campaigns and strategies.
And they're often, am I right, placed though within the same grouping as, say, a strategist, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So our group is called Marketing Science at
Okay.
Ayzenberg, and it's sort of the head and the heart in a way of those two disciplines coming together, the strategy discipline and the analytics discipline.
And are there other agencies where you might still have strategy and analysts together, but it would just be called the strategy group?
Sometimes, yeah, it's really different across the board. Marketing science has been kind of a common term that's come up, typically though only with agencies with a strong data and analytics offering, like Ayzenberg. So others that are maybe a little more traditional, don't have that kind of robust data element, might just call it a strategy group or a strategic planning group.
So, where does a data scientist come in? Is a data scientist independent of both analyst and strategist?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I would say a data scientist is like one step even further down kind of the spectrum beyond an analyst. Like a data scientist can do more than just derive kind of learnings about an audience. They can actually organize and kind of manage larger pieces of data, figure out ways to have them work together and incorporate them so that you can derive learnings even further down the process. So they've got a much more extensive data and analytics capabilities, typically with also more technologies in their tool belt as well than an analyst.
Cool. And what about planners?
Oh, okay. Yeah, planners. So this is maybe controversial, but so Planner was JWT. It was the original agency that coined the term account planner back in, I think it was either the 50s or the 60s. And at that point, the strategy discipline didn't exist. So it was fundamentally like, it was basically an account person who said, we've got this new discipline and it's called account planning. And it really was at the time, they were realizing that they needed to understand the audience better and do more research to bring in that voice of the audience. So fundamentally, I look at them the same. I think that the name of the titles, I think strategist has become more popular in recent times. It's much more like expansive and all-encompassing. I think the idea of a plan, it doesn't always exist anymore. We've got to be a little bit more kind of flexible and adaptable. And so I think strategist is a much more just relevant term for the world we live in now and what the job looks like now. So
Yeah.
kind of the same, but the roles changed, so the name's changed.
All right. Well, you did a good job with the glossary. I feel like you did a nice job, like summarizing them all in a single sentence too. But I think also kind of highlighting, tipping our hand to sort of where we're headed together, which is, are those cubby holes or glossary terms, even more generally than just the wrestling match you just did over Planner, starting to be loosened in a modern advertising agency. Our roles and responsibilities are arguably changing. You did a nice job of defining along the way also what a creative director is. Someone whose job it is to represent the work. But then when I think about it, how can we do the work and represent the work without also having a sense of who the audience is that we are making the work for, and then the lines start to blur. So I wonder, if you could tell me a little bit about what your take is on the roles of the creative director and the strategist here in your world now.
Yeah, and it's not as clean of a picture. I think in a simpler world, we would maybe say that the strategist is collecting and compiling all of the information we can about our audience, pulling out compelling insights and then bringing them to the creative director like a gift, like, here you go. And then the creative director goes away with his or her team and comes up with these beautiful ideas. And I think actually in school, it's often, like in advertising school, it can often be painted in a way that that's how it works. When in reality, I firmly believe that it doesn't always work that way. And I think those lines are often more blurred. I think the best work comes from a much more collaborative relationship between strategy and creative. And I've often gone on small rants about how I think we've almost done ourselves a disservice by calling some of us strategists and some of us creatives. Like in an advertising agency and in our business, I think everyone needs to think strategically about how we're approaching a problem. Like we're solving problems together, right? Coming up with great ideas. So everyone needs to think strategically. And on the flip side, we've got to be creative in how we approach problem solving. We've got to be creative in how we figure out how to learn about an audience and interpret the learnings we get about that audience. So, I really look at the lines as being quite blurry. And in fact, it may be different for every project. I think it's all really in the name of coming up with the best work that's going to solve, the problems at hand. So whatever it looks like to get there, I don't really care as long as we figure out together how to do it,
Yeah.
Which is radical. I recognize for some, I think, especially those who've been in the industry for a long time, not everybody looks at it that way. So I recognize that too. But it's worked out for me so far, and kind of how I like to approach it.
Yeah, I noticed a few years ago myself that for the members of my team who were younger and digital natives and social first and digital first, this transition was already happening organically and seamlessly, that a person who sat in a seat that was called a social strategist was quite frequently making the assets that they were concepting. And so I think there's something in both in the thinking about it and also just in speed, right? Is that we're getting in the digital world, we're getting so much more comfortable with iterating quickly. And again, thinking about how, we want to make assets that are responsive to almost moment to moment changes in the audience and their attitudes, it makes a lot of sense that you would have to blur the lines between those two
Yeah.
roles.
And I didn't even think about it. Such a great point. I didn't even think about how social and digital has probably impacted the increase in collaboration. Because fundamentally, you kind of have to now. You don't have enough time to, again, like go into a hole and come up with some powerful audience insight, and then hand it off and let the creatives go into a hole. Like that doesn't really exist. Doesn't often exist anymore. Like you kind of have to all roll up your sleeves and say what's the best path to getting this done in the time that we have allowed. So
Yeah.
I didn't think about how social and digital kind of have been probably a large part of why we're doing things the way we are now.
Yeah, definitely. I think, the other thing that I wonder about is, I can tell that you have not a rigid process, but a rigorous process, that you're process oriented to a certain degree. And so I wonder in the olden days of strategists that I used to work with, I can't believe I just said that, in ye olden days, uh, the way that tended to manifest, and it really wasn't just strategy, it was really the whole agency, was a much more linear process. Everybody wanted to, first we sit down and we do our research, and then we move on to analyzing that research, and then we move on to developing strategic insights, and everything had its place, and it was
Yeah.
at the end of that process that it was, like you said, a gift handed to the creative department, and then the creative department began its work. So now that all of that is arguably disrupted by the speed of digital and social natives, et cetera, how do you hold on to as a person who needs and wants and leverages process? What replaces that linear process? What is your process?
There are times where I try to uphold some of that still. I recognize I maybe sound like I'm like, yeah, throw the process out the window, let's figure it out. But you're right, I do have a little bit more rigor to how I like to do things. But I think it's like, one of the smallest things that we've been doing lately with the team that I work on here at Ayzenberg is bringing each other in, bringing the creative in, the creative director into the very beginning of the process. Like I'm almost writing the brief, no matter how much or how little time I have to write that brief, I'm writing it with them. And similarly, when we get into the creative concepting phase and the ideation phase, I'm almost like another one of the creatives in the room, in a sense, helping concept the ideas. It's like instead of this handoff, we're sort of like coming together on the process, and I have no ego around it. Like if a creative, it's all again in the interest of the best work. So I think when everybody can sit down and agree and recognize that, let's just figure out what's the best process for the given project and what's going to lead to the best work, then everybody's sort of in alignment. But typically it looks like this sort of, again, like collaborative effort right from the beginning. And even if that means that the creative directors writing the positioning statement, like the strategic positioning statement, maybe accidentally or maybe on purpose, like, oh, I think this could be really compelling. Like, great. Simultaneously, like, I've thrown out a line here or there that's ended up in the creative portion of a deck. And again, everybody's like champions that and is all for that, because if that's the best work, then that's what we think is the best work. So it's a much more, it goes hand in hand. Strategy and creative is sort of like simultaneously happening throughout the whole process now, I think.
Yeah, it ultimately, in many ways, comes down to the importance of listening. It sounds like what you're emphasizing in your process is a very active advocacy of listening to each other first and from the very beginning. Whereas I think that in the traditional way I was describing that advertising agencies often used to be organized, and maybe, and I'm sure many still are, there's an element of just leaping, like doing, like I'm going to do the creative part. You've now done your strategy part, and now it's my turn to do my creative part, which is, I wonder if there's room for both. If there's a way that they kind of, it sounds to me like you pick and choose, the parts of it that work for you, and that changes also from job to job and assignment to assignment. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's also like instead of the doing, or not instead of, before we get into the doing, there's the thinking. And
Mm-hmm.
like both creatives and strategists have to do a fair amount of like thinking and ideating before any work can ever get done, right? So I feel
Yeah.
like it's almost like that thinking stage that's like where it really meshes. It's like instead of me first thinking about this thing and then kicking it to you to think about this thing, let's try to think about it together so we can
Yeah.
expedite this process and bounce ideas off each other, like work off each other.
Yep.
I'm curious, you're from the creative side of the flip side. So what do you
Yep.
think about it? I'm curious what you think
I
about
think
that process.
Yeah, I think you and I work in very similar ways, and part of it also reminds me then that some of it may come down to always to personality, right? Like I've been told over time that in both a way that has been held up as a criticism as well as a way that's been held up as a compliment, that I'm a very collaborative creative, that but even as I say that, that pick and choosing the parts that work for you plays for me too, because I do notice that there is a time, and I think for me, it's after the initial collaborative phase of like, let's all get excited about this idea and kick it around and test the wheels and stuff. Then there does come a time when I really am like, okay, I really need some time to myself to just like wrap my head around the details of this and develop my point of view on it. But then I think I'm pretty good about also then coming back and going, okay, here's my point of view. And I won't say, I've learned over time that I would often say, I'm not too attached to my ideas. I definitely can get attached to ideas, and I can get like people, the team comes in and they kick it around, and there's parts that I really liked that they don't like. But I think I've gotten pretty good, especially over time, at allowing everyone in the group's ideas to kind of complement one another. There's a process that I think actually you might have told me that you've done some improv. Have you ever done some like kind of improvisational acting or comedy work or
No, I've done
no?
a couple of workshops, but I've
Yeah.
never like gotten on a stage.
Well, there's a principle that you would have got potentially even in a workshop that is yet, called yes and. You
Hmm.
basically, when someone makes a suggestion to you in an improv, one of the only rules in most improv groups is you can't deny it. Like if I say to you, wow, what a beautiful red dress you have on, you're not allowed to say, no, I don't. You have to you want to accept it and then add to it. And that's a principle that I try to apply in the creative group as well. Is I get where you're coming from, and now I'm going to take that and see if I can add something onto it. And then eventually you need to editorialize and get it down. But so I don't know. Maybe this is all like a modern. You and I have both just been developing together in kind of this way that we're labeling the modern advertising agency, or maybe we just have kind of similar personalities as far as how we approach the work. But it
That's
certainly
awesome.
makes it easy to get along, right? So I'm going to ask you again: where does the job of the strategist end then, and the job of the creative director begin?
Oh gosh, I don't know. It's a moving target, I think. Well, I think, or so there's one way to look at it. It's a moving target that depends on the nature of the job, the client, the campaign, the project. And so it depends in there. Or you can get maybe really simplify it, which like the strategist in me likes to like simplify. And I think that it's that tension point between the audience, right? Having the voice of the audience, and where that meets the best work. Like I think
Hmm.
it's in there, and while there's like an overlap, and each has to maintain the interests of the other in a way. I think it's like that tension point where the job stops and starts.
Yeah.
Um, each like it's a very fine moment, but it's somewhere in there.
Yeah, and I might have pressed you too hard because I also, that's a great answer. And I also really like something that you said earlier, which is, maybe we're doing ourselves a disservice when we think of ourselves in these two camps instead of just embracing that we're all responsible for both. And maybe I would just yes and say, with a different amount of emphasis. Like I remembered as you were just describing, what your answer, at the end to that question. I remembered that I used to say to the team that that we as creatives and producers, as the makers of things, we're not unresponsible for managing the client, which is the accounts job. It's just a
Yes.
little bit less our job. But the producers need to make it in a way that helps the account team do their job, and the creatives need to do creative that helps the account team do their job. And as you twist the triangle that way, it's true for each thing, from my perspective, is that the other camps are also responsible for, because we're a team, because we're one team, you
Right,
know?
right. And it can be hard, I think, when we get to, because as a byproduct of all the work that we're trying to produce much faster than we ever have before, right? We're trying to
Mm,
churn out more thinking and more work than ever. I think we lean on these separate functions and disciplines and titles and roles to try to create really efficient systems and processes. And while there's tons of value in that, I appreciate all of that. It on the flip side, it can do us a disservice because we can get so focused, with our blinders on and go, well, my job is this piece of this larger machine. And to your point, I'm like, well, we're a team, right? We're not a machine, we're a team. And we all have this collective responsibility. So yeah, that's your role, but remember where it fits in the bigger picture. And I think it can be hard when you're laser focused on one project and one campaign after the next to sort of look up that way. But I guess as leader, that's where the leadership, I think, responsibility comes in to place too. We talked about my responsibilities as a strategy director. Like I see that it's the leadership function of that job to make sure that everybody's kind of looking up a little bit and understanding the role they play and where it fits in the larger picture, not by itself.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I have been so pleased to have you as a guest. That notion that again, I'm just going to come back to it, that the strategist is responsible for representing the audience, is now one of those things that is going to stick
I
with me
love it.
forever, and it's a terrific gift. So thank you for giving it to me.
Yeah, you're welcome. I love it.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Listen In. You'll always find us streaming on LinkedIn, along with live chat comments from myself and guests. After the stream is over, we archive the show here on our LinkedIn page for Ayzenberg, and you'll also find the episodes at AListDaily.com. So have a great week, and as always, keep your ears on.